Welcome everyone to our media availability here in the Senate. It's I think the 10th day of the legislative session, and we were working on some bills, probably some of those from the interim. More complicated bills come later in the session. We had General Levy here today, and it was good to hear from him. Our Hill Air Force Base is an important part of our economy and our culture here in Utah.
It's correct. And General Levy, Hill Air Force Base is under his command. He has his fingers into lots of bases across the country, but the big ones are Hill, Tinker in Oklahoma, and Warner Robins.
They're very quiet today.
Those are all the.
It's pretty quiet most every day.
Those are all those bases are part of what they call the air logistics system, and that's where all the repairs are done on the aircraft, Air Force wide.
And under the leadership of Senator Stevenson a couple of years ago, we appropriated, I think it was about $30 million to build a
21.5.
21.5 to build a
still in the back of my hand. So.
Build a building on it with state funds at Hill Air Force Base to encourage some technical jobs that would come here. He talked about zeros and ones, and the warfare that could happen on a software level, because you take someone's software down in an airplane or even a larger part of the Air Force or military anywhere, that could be a big deal, and so that type of thing is important for our nation and for our state.
That was a very large piece of us procuring the bed down of the F-35 and all the repairs on the F-35, which is probably that could be a 50-year mission for the Air Force and Hill Air Force Base. So what that really does for us is it solidifies our position if the federal government decides to do another round of BRAC closures. It means that Hill would be very light on that list, or hopefully not on it at all. So that was the final piece of a lot of things we've been doing over the last 15 or 20 years.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions from yesterday from people that are viewing over the internet, and we appreciate those questions that have come in. And so let's address each one of those.
Of course. The first one says, hashtag your session. So if our schools now passes, will you continue to pillage the education budget, or more or less? Explain your answer.
I'm going to turn that question over to our appropriations chair. Pillage is an interesting word. Maybe we'd invite you to come up and be part of our process and see how the budget is actually put together. And maybe you might not use that word. We try to balance hundreds of requests for Medicaid, for infrastructure, for education, and it's our job, and it's a difficult job, trying to prioritize that funding, and education is always at the top of that list.
Education is certainly the largest portion of our budget outside of social services. But social services, it's the biggest piece of our state budget. I would think that there's no place in the state budget process for the word pillage, as there is no place for the word surplus. And I really believe if you go back and look over the last 3 years, I would find it very difficult to see. I think we will, after we finish this year, I would guess that we're approaching $1 billion of new ongoing money in education over a 3-year period. That doesn't quite fit pillage in my world.
If I could, I think it's $800 million in the last 3 years for K through 12, but also I just want to throw in, if it's okay, Utah has a very unique process in that every legislator is on a appropriations subcommittee. In most state legislatures, you have 2 or 3 members of each body who get to do the budget, and 90%, 95% of the legislators don't really have input. So I think Utah has a model of how the budget should be done, and we're not always perfect, but I think we get it right most of the time.
We appreciate the question very much, and actually invite, if you're watching today, I think it was a question from yesterday, but if you're watching, I'd give you a personal invitation to come up, and I'd show you through what the budget process is, and so you can have an appreciation of the magnitude of the effort that goes forth into putting budget together, education budget, and so forth. Robert?
Sort of a follow-up on that question. If the initiative does pass, I guess that money would come in form of income tax and would be earmarked therefore for education. But how have you talked at all about how that money would be spent? What kind of areas you guys would focus on, or is it still premature for that?
Well, I'm maybe turn some time over to Senator Stevenson for this too, because that's an area that he's focused on, and then Senator Davis, if you have some comments on that. We appreciate our minority leader being here and representatives from our minority party and our press availability. It really, I think, is good, so we appreciate you being here. But to that question, I think there are some elements of accountability in the initiative. In fact, I don't, it's more than think I know there are. So there is some direction to the legislature that would be in statute once if that did pass this fall. But there would be more work that the legislature, I believe, would have to make, because that's a big chunk of money thrown at education in a very short period of time, and making sure that that's actually spent in a efficient and productive way, I think, is going to be a challenge.
And there's really, Robert, there are two pieces of that. There's a sales tax piece and the income tax piece. Both would be directed specifically to education. But the president's absolutely right. There's several areas that they need some help in. And I think specifically, I know there's quite a bit that goes to teacher compensation. And gosh, I can't remember the rest of it. We looked at this bill yesterday too, but I've looked at the initiative proposal. But I think we're off on we're really in a pretty good track if you look at what we have done, because we have put, as I said, I think by the time we finish this year, we'll be up. The governor had recommended $1 billion, and this will be $1 billion of new money into education. We've covered all the growth, student growth. We've covered good raises for education, and so we'll see how this works out. But it is a lot of money, and it's a lot of money to throw into anything at one time. There'll have to be some real scrutiny in the way this is spent.
Senator Davis, and then Senator Wilder, did you have a comment? Okay.
Though I'm quite supportive of the initiative, because I really believe we need to put more money into education than we are. But that being said, when it comes into the general fund, that becomes a different issue, because we have other needs that we have to balance in that as well. So there's a balancing act just in how that works with the way we have our budget structure in the state of Utah, and the amount of money that goes into education coming from the income tax. And we've been trying for years, and that was part of the reason that we put higher ed into it, the public did, was to try to alleviate the pressure on the general fund and balance all education out through the income tax in the state of Utah. That area continues to grow more rapidly than other parts of the budget. That being said, and we had that conversation last week about the income tax, and really working to make it more fair and to broaden that base. If we're going to do a flat tax, we need to make sure that our tax is flat.
So our schools now, I agree. I think we need more funding in education, but I have some concerns about it. Number one, 15% of that $800 million goes to colleges and universities, and they certainly need the money. But the reason I say that is that only leaves about $615 million that goes to K through 12. And as Senator Stevenson just said, we've added more than that in the last 3 years. The reason I'm concerned is nobody's saying in 2018, wow, we're so much better than we were 3 years ago when we had $800 million less. So number one, I don't think that, I think there's an insatiable desire for more money for education, and I'm not sure that our schools now, if it passes, will even put a dent in that. But second of all, that school's going to go straight to that money goes straight to the schools. You're going to have a committee like the community council. They have to approve how that money is going to be spent. So the legislature, I don't think, gets to do that, and then that has to be approved by the school district. And I understand they're trying to bypass administration. As I read the initiative, I think 25% of those funds that go to the school only 25% can be spent on teacher salary increases. I've heard people say, well, this will decrease our classroom sizes, but none of that money can be spent on buildings. And so if you can't build more classrooms, I'm not sure how we're going to decrease classroom sizes. So while I think I'm generally supportive of getting more money into our public education system, I'm not convinced that this is going to satisfy people. And in fact, if it passes, it'll move us from 51st in per pupil funding all the way up to 49th. And I say that a little bit facetiously because I mean, we're going to jump ahead of Idaho, but we're still going to be hearing the same complaints. That's my concern.
President, if I might, the one thing that Senator Weiler, that at least right now, all of the capital improvements in our school districts, I think, are being funded, or the bulk of them, through our property tax.
Yes,
and the legislature, we really don't have much control over that. So.
But I'm saying that this money could not be used for buildings, so that doesn't fix that problem.
Let's go to that next question.
This viewer asked, why is SJR 9 ERA still in rules and when will it get out?
So when it has enough votes, then it would get out of rules. And that's really kind of a procedural issue up here. And so anybody else have
it was read into the Senate floor yesterday, so it's not a comment. It would be astronomical if it was out of your rules that quickly. Usually there is some sifting process, but also what the president said. So.
That is a bill of one of the members of our minority side, and we'll be doing what we can to make sure it gets a fair hearing.
Ask you a question.
Yes.
The UTA board later this afternoon has a meeting to adopt a resolution to support the proposed reform bill up here. Wondering what chances you see for that reform bill passing, and are there any portions of it that might be sticking points?
Well, I think that's going to pass because, and this was a conversation I had with the task force chairs at one point, is we don't want to get out ahead of the stakeholders, and I thought, and I believe they have effectively brought the stakeholders in, and there's buy-in, and with that kind of buy-in, I haven't heard anything. If there was problems, we'd be hearing about it, and I'm not hearing anything. So, and unless that changes, I think it's going to pass. Senator Davis, I don't know what the minority party's.
You know, I agree with that. I think if the stakeholders are in agreement with that and the task force's outcome, from our member that was on that task force, I've heard nothing but positive on that.
The only portion of that I think is maybe questionable, the governance, I think, is exactly what's been talked about, is if there's additional funding, that's probably the thing that hasn't been worked out totally.
And that's true.
I'm wondering what all of you think of the new governance structure, if that will solve the concerns that have been raised over the years about UTA, to your satisfaction, to be able to invest state money into the entity.
Well, it's really not to our satisfaction. I think part of the problem with UTA is the public. And we serve the public, and we're here at the public's benefit. And so this goes right to the people along the Wasatch Front who've been involved in UTA, and UTA has had a trust problem. And it was very evident 2 years ago, 18 months ago, when the initiative was voted down. It was mainly because people are struggling with what's going on at UTA, and UTA has made, to their credit, some changes structurally without this bill, and I think things are running a lot better at UTA so far, and this is just another step in governance. But if this passes, this is not what we have known UTA to be. This is going to be a completely different organization. There'll still be a lot of the same players there, but the way the governance changes here, this is a new era now, I believe, for UTA or our transit system, and I think I personally, this kind of a reset, I think, has been needed for a long time, and I'm grateful that we've come to this point. And now it will be this new organization's job to build that trust level in the public and make sure that they're utilizing those dollars to create a transit system that is, but we're going to need more money into transit to make that all work. So there's a lot to be done. Senator Weiler?
If I could, I'm just speaking for myself, and of course this bill hasn't reached the Senate, but I think the criticism right now is the board is so big that nobody feels the onus of the responsibility, like this is on me. As I understand it, the proposal is to have the board only be 3 members. I'm concerned about that as well, because then any two votes, and we're hearing from a lot of our counties that the 3-member commission, a lot of counties are looking to change away from that. So personally, just speaking for myself, I was not a member of the task force or the work group, but I'd be much more comfortable with 5. But it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of the House. But I do want to add, I do think
It's a Senate bill. It's Harper's bill.
Okay. I did not realize that, but I do think UTA has been moving in the right direction for several years, and I want to echo what the president said. I'm sorry, I was thinking it was a House bill.
Yeah, it's, so we'll have it here soon. Senator Adams?
So, yeah, go ahead, Gene.
Thank you.
Senator
Public
Davis.
perception needs to change, I think, of what's going on. I believe the legislature, as we look at the future of this state, we believe mass transit is a very important part in our transportation, solving our transportation and clean air problems. We've got to have a better mass transit system. The real idea, I think, behind this is, and the legislature jumping into it as heavy as we have, is really to take a look at that public perception and how can we change that perception so that the public understands that mass transit is good and the governance needs to be improved.
And sometimes perceptions are actually real problems, right?
That can be a big problem.
Yeah, I actually think it even goes beyond that, is that, when I was in school, I had multiple choice questions, and it was A, B, C, and all the above, and I think we need all the above. And Utah's been a collaborative state. We see public transit and road transportation, but the best thing I believe out of that new governance model is that it combines them. And whether it's roads or public transit or whatever it is, I think we need to have a holistic approach at it and not just a segregated event of one transit aspect over another.
Absolutely.
And I think that to give that collaborative governance is probably, I think, one of the better things that came out of it. Now, whether it's 3 or 5 or what it is, I'm not sure. But I do believe to combine and have a joint oversight and to have perspective as to which is most efficient and which maybe be the most cost efficient and not only economically efficient, but which moves the most traffic, I think that's going to be very positive.
President, you mentioned Prop 1, which went down a couple of years ago. This bill would have the state impose that essentially by 2022 if the counties don't get around to passing it. Do you support that idea?
I do. Because when you put a deadline on something, I think you get a better, or at least the outcome actually, you get the result. And I
have to
believe,
make a choice.
yeah. If we didn't have a deadline of March, whatever the date is this year, the second Thursday in March, we could spend all year putting a budget
I
together.
mean, you can take a look at
They're
public
saying you
education
pass
and
it
see
or
that.
you're going to get it in.
I think that there'll be action, personally, and so I support the measure in the bill. Anybody else? Ralph?
Yeah, I support the change in governance. There's no doubt that it's needed. The only thing I'm looking forward to is when we have a bullet train from St. George to Richfield to Salt Lake, and have a way for all of us to take in mass transit.
Stop in Monroe.
Yeah, stop in Monroe.
He would drive to Richfield.
Is that one line?
Yeah, well,
Or 2 different lines?
No, just one will be fine.
But if I could follow up on what Lee asked, is there any concern though in taking something that the voters rejected and then saying, well, we hear you, we don't care, we're going to do this anyway?
Well, that's not what we're feeling. Okay, so what we're feeling is, and I've mentioned this here before, but I'm going to mention it again. Over the last year, I've come to a realization that it's taking me a lot longer to get somewhere. and I'm finding congestion hitting a level that I've never seen before. And this is after we have spent billions of dollars on roads. So this is not about what we don't care what the voters say or anything like that. This is about infrastructure and the growth that is that is coming upon us in ways that we haven't anticipated, and we are not keeping up. And we will not be able to keep up unless we are going to be, and we have to make those tough decisions. But this is about the need to get these revenues to those entities to provide the infrastructure for the growth that we're going to be experiencing over the next 20 to 30 years.
Why not then just impose the tax now as opposed to telling voters approve it or we'll do it for you? Why not just impose?
Well, the narrative is we don't, that's, the reason why we're waiting is just the exact opposite argument that Robert brings up. We want to give them the opportunity to do that.
But why? I mean, why not just do it if it needs to be done? If it's so important, why can't the state take
Well, I
responsibility?
think we need to
for
have
doing it?
public buy-in on it. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that we've done multiple different quarter-cent sales tax increases, and they're all over the board as far as what county has imposed them and at what percentage. And this area, I think, needs more work, quite honestly. I think it's part of the bill that needs to be a little more purview on it is that Davis County never passed the second quarter, and yet they passed the last one. And Salt Lake County has passed the first two, but not the last one. And Utah County, I keep trying to remember where they're at, what they passed. I think they've got two in place, but not the third. And it's a hodgepodge effort, and I think that part of the bill probably needs to be more looked at, and maybe we need to spend a little more time on it. But the fact that people across the service area are paying different fees, it's better to look at least both public and surface transportation more on a holistic approach than it is by county. It's pretty hard to travel out of Davis County and have the train stop at the border of Salt Lake County. It doesn't happen. Or into Weber County or into Utah County. And there probably needs to be more continuity between those, and whether it's a mandate or whether it's a voter effort, that probably needs to be refined. But the fact of the matter is everybody probably ought to be paying the same amount for the same service, and that the service levels ought to be equal throughout that area. And how to get that done is probably going to be complex, but I think at least bringing that issue up gives us a chance to review it.
Isn't that what imposing a state tax would do, though, is make sure that all users in all those areas?
Yeah, but we haven't done that in the past. It's so mixed up. How do you, it's got to take more work, because you got quarter to quarter in Salt Lake County. That passed, and Davis and Weber, back when they were paying a full half cent, Salt Lake County was not, and yet I think the services were different. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make it equal, and I think that's going to be a real effort.
And what Senator Adams just described is really a disparate impact on UTA riders, because Salt Lake County and Utah County didn't pass the last one. There's more buses bringing people to Front Runner in Davis County, and then people in Salt Lake County and Weber are complaining that they have to transfer buses 2 or 3 times, and they don't realize that's because their county didn't pass that transit portion of the tax that gives UTA. So UTA is getting criticized for things that the voters rejected the ballot box, which I don't think is a fair criticism of UTA, because people don't always connect those dots.
We're entering an era of the need to invest heavily in infrastructure to meet the needs of the growth. And this will be a challenge for the legislature. But if we're dealing with reality as a legislature, we know that there's going to need to be more funds going into that element. And having now broken down these silos between transit and roads is going to be very healthy, because then they'll be analyzed together And I think that with density, you're going to have more transit. That's a fact that we're going to have to face, because we can't keep up with building just additional capacity on our roads.
With the governance board change and I think more people seeing exactly what the president talked about, the gridlock that's out there, I think we have a chance to build trust in the public towards mass transit and better ways to be able to do it. I think that they'll see the necessity, have an opportunity to get behind the new board, and I think that the people will be able to come along a little bit with us on this now that we've gotten to this point.
I think encouraging local government to get into it, to level out the playing field, if you will, in the tax increases that are being proposed. There needs to be the buy-in in the local government and local cities that we want mass transit and we want it to serve the people, not just connecting counties, but really serving the community. And I think that's an emphasis also, that mass transit has been missing that opportunity to really get the service in when it's needed to the people.
Can I ask what this means for rural Utah, Senator O'Curley?
Well, it means we're going to pay more when we come into the urban counties, and it probably means that we ought to move the state capital to Fillmore, move some of the traffic down there. But
Is that a protected bill?
we have the same frustrations that everybody has up here. As I travel from Sevier County, I start hitting congestion just north of Payson. And I see it all the way into the state capitol. When I go home on Friday afternoon, if I'm not out here by 3 o'clock, I know I might as well go to dinner and wait until 6:30 or so to get out, because it's going to take me that long to get out of town. So we have the same frustrations. We see the need that we just have all got to get behind on public transit, and we also see the air pollution problems that goes along with the congestion. And I think everybody wants to try to help that as much as we can.
But is there any interest in areas? I mean, you jokingly mentioned a bullet train earlier, but wouldn't it be useful to look at making connections to other portions of the state?
Some of the rural areas have done that. There are buses that come on an irregular basis as needed. There are a lot of opportunities and efforts to try to make sure that if people need to get up here for medical help, which is often the case, we don't have the medical needs or the medical facilities that are needed down in our area. So we do have the beginning probably of some mass transit kinds of opportunities to bring people in.
It boils down to money.
Yeah.
To provide that kind of infrastructure. I'd asked Senator Weiler to come in and talk about his bill.
Instead, I talked about everything else.
But we've run out of time, and I want to address. Is there another question from viewers? And this will be our last question. And then, if there's any other questions that you have, you can talk to us individually.
This viewer asked, has leadership seen today's Beverage Institute flyer opposing the .05 DUI law? Any reaction or update on conversations regarding potential changes?
Who's seen it?
I've seen it.
I haven't.
Senator Weiler.
I think
Thanks for coming.
the flyer's technically accurate. I mean, one of the things the flyer says is it's not illegal to have a glass of wine with lunch, and that's not illegal, and we're not making it necessarily illegal unless you don't eat any food and you weigh less than 100 pounds, but it's also not illegal to take an Uber back to your office if you have wine with lunch. And so, I think we're going to see, I'll be surprised if we don't see an effort to maybe diminish the first offense at a .05, but I went into last year's session very skeptical about the .05, and I came out a firm believer that as a government, we should be sending the signal, don't drink and drive, and that it's not, that a little bit's not okay. And I think at .08, we do tell people, yeah, you can have a little bit and drive. I think at .05, we're sending the signal, don't drink and drive at all. And I was very encouraged to see the publicity around .05 dramatically reduce the DUI arrests last summer and spring, even though the bill hasn't taken effect. And so I think we're on the right course. That's my opinion.
And the United States, quite frankly, is behind the times. Most of the world, you look at a map of the world and where .05 is and where .08 is,